Chapter 366 Rewards 1. Staring at myself in the mirror and fixing my tie, I turned to glance at Waylon, who was next to me. He too was staring at himself in the mirror, putting on a suit. Tying my hair back with an armband, I muttered in annoyance. Why do I have to wear a suit? It's not like dwarves also wear suits. Because we're about to attend a banquet with the dwarven leaders. It is customary to dress well in such an important event. Waylon replied back, neatly fixing his hair. Squinting and staring at his figure from where I was standing, I couldn't hide my jealousy. Sigh, is this the difference in our genes? Just how high must his charm be to look like that at his age? Waylon was probably in his 50s, yet he looked no older than 20. His perfect jawline, which perfectly contrasted with his face and body, made me feel ashamed of myself. Well, not as much actually. Stroking my chin and staring myself in the mirror, my previous thoughts halted. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I had to say I looked quite charming myself. Having signed a contract with Angelica, who used to be the matriarch of the Charm tribe, a subsidiary of the Charm clan, my charm increased by quite a bit. It was now in the rank range. Pretty much my highest stat at the moment. From the lowest to now the highest. Wasn't that quite an ironic situation? That said, as I had been wearing a mask throughout the whole ordeal back at Inferno, I wasn't able to get a proper look at my face till this past week and a half when everything was over, and I really do have to say my charm increase really made a difference. I could almost rival Jean and Kevin in terms of appearance. Aren't you staring at yourself a bit too much? Snapping me out of my thoughts, I felt Waylon's large hand rest on my shoulder as he looked at me in the mirror opposite to me. Scrutinizing my face carefully, he showed an impressed look. Gotta say, you really do look a lot better now than before. You're almost unrecognizable. You're over-exaggerating. I replied, my eyes squinting to get a better look at myself in the mirror. Although I indeed look a little bit better, I still look like the old me. Fundamentally, all that happened was that my skin became smoother and all the previous scars that I had on my face had completely disappeared. While I was in thought, leaning forward, Waylon touched his chin before he shook his head. Nope, don't see any resemblance at all. You may as well have had plastic surgery. My mouth opened and closed multiple times as I had hard trouble stopping myself from throwing as many curses as possible. Haha. Waylon suddenly burst out laughing, amused by my reaction. Smack. Slapping me on the back, he consoled. Don't worry, I'm just kidding. You just looked a little bit stiff, wanted to help you relax a bit. Really? I asked, raising my brow. Was he really just trying to cheer me up? I was a bit skeptical of his words since I was not nervous at all. But well, it was the thought that counted. But it looked like I had been deceived again as Waylon smirked and shook his head. Nah, was kidding. You think someone who has no qualms infiltrating the main headquarters of Inferno will be nervous over a banquet? You. Pointing my hand in Waylon's direction, who was having the time of his life laughing at me, I shook my finger multiple times. I finally get it. The mystery has been solved. I said out loud. My words piqued Waylon's interest as he stopped laughing and asked. Get what? I finally get where Emma got her annoyingness from. Who's you? You're just as annoying as her. Huh. What do you mean by that? Waylon asked, seemingly offended by the fact that I called his daughter annoying. But I didn't care. Raising my hand and pointing it at him, I continued. Face the truth, Waylon. She's the product you created. You should know all too well how her character is. Don't go too far, Rin. Waylon pretended to glare in my direction. Are you calling my daughter annoying? What you gonna do about it? I retorted back, puffing my chest. Now stop with the jokes. We're about to attend the banquet. Just as things were about to get heated, entering the changing room was Douglas, who merely shook his head at the two of us. He wasn't mad or anything, as he obviously knew that Waylon and I were merely joking around, but his eyes still contained a slight trace of helplessness. You guys are wasting too much time chatting. We need to go in the next couple of minutes, lest we want to set a bad impression on the dwarves, Douglas said, checking onto his wrist where a nice watch rested. Damn. Wearing a nice gray suit which perfectly outlined his body, I was left surprised by how buff Douglas actually was. Because he usually wore baggy clothes, I was unable to realize just how fit he actually was. But Douglas was damn fit, as his suit perfectly displayed how defined his body was. Especially his shoulders, which were extremely wide. While I was looking at his clothes, turning to face Waylon, Douglas said, We'll be leaving in the next couple of minutes. Fix your hair and go downstairs." Then turning his head to face me, Douglas's eyes paused on my neck area. Or to be precise, where my tie was. Raising his hand and pointing at it, he asked, "Do you need help with that?" The moment he said those words, my body froze. Lowering my head and staring at my tie, I looked back at Douglas and nodded my head. "Yes, please." This was probably the second or third time I had worn a suit, and while I still couldn't tie my tie properly, would always end up almost strangling myself. It was odd. Out of all the things I could do, tying a tie was just not one of them. I should probably spend some time learning this. Would probably only take me a couple of minutes to learn, but it just had never been on my priority list of things I had to do. With a soft smile on his face, reminiscent of a friendly neighborhood uncle, Douglas beckoned for me to come to him. "All right, come here." "Thanks." Thanking Douglas, I moved up to him, who slowly grabbed my tie and started tying it. This feels like an oddly familiar scene. As Douglas was tying my tie, my brows furrowed slightly as an old memory started to resurface inside of my mind. It was right after the banquet, after I defeated Thibaut. Outside of the mansion, tired, sitting on a bench with... Unbeknownst to me, I had fallen into a slight trance as I reminisced over the past. Done. Already? It was only after I heard Douglas's words that I snapped out of it. Turning my body slightly, Douglas pointed at my reflection on the mirror. "They're all set. What do you think?" With my tie now done and suit that perfectly outlined my body, I had to admit I looked really good. Turning my head, I thanked Douglas. "I like it, thank you." Smiling softly, Douglas patted me on the shoulder before turning around and leaving the room. "You look much better now. Let's get going." "All right." Fixing my collar and hair a bit, I turned around and followed Douglas out of the room. The banquet was held in a separate location from the Elder Council, inside of a large building near the center of the city. According to Waylon and Douglas, this was an exclusive banquet to commemorate those that participated in the war and contributed. In other words, it was the award ceremony. It was where our contributions were announced and our rewards were handed. If I had to be honest, I was quite excited about this part. Now that everything was over, it was finally time for me to reap the rewards of my struggle. I already had something in mind. After mulling over it for the past week and a half or so, I thought that I had come up with a good request. Sitting inside of a small carriage, which was in fact an artifact, I turned to face Douglas and Waylon, who were both sitting next to me. "Are you guys sure you told them that I had signed a contract with a demon?" The fact that my mana was tainted with demonic energy was not something I could hide from the prying eyes of the elders. They may have not been able to tell back at Inferno, or were able to, but because they were busy trying to fight the Durgars, had glossed over it. But now that I was going to attend the banquet, there was no way they wouldn't notice. I didn't want any unnecessary drama to arise because of the demon contract that I had signed with Angelica. After all, I didn't want to face a similar situation that had happened back in the human domain, where I was forced to leave due to some special circumstances. Just remembering it depressed me. Why couldn't the world give me a break? Fortunately, it seemed as though my worries were unfounded as Douglas shook his head. "Don't worry, Rander has taken care of that matter already. You can come without any problems. Everyone has already been told about you. Just relax and enjoy the small banquet." Well, fine. As long as that was taken care of, I didn't really have to worry about anything else. Propping my elbow by the side of the carriage and staring at the lively city, my shoulders relaxed a little. I really want to go home, I thought as I looked at the streets of Henler. I really wanted to go back and meet my parents, Kevin and the others. But I also knew that I couldn't do that at the moment. There were many things that I still needed to do. I first needed to remove the chip inside of my head. Without it removed, I couldn't go back, as the monolith would always pursue me. After that, I had to have my sword forged, which Malval was taking care of. And lastly, wait for the demons to completely retreat before even considering getting out of Henler. Although we had won the war, they had still not fully retreated yet. We couldn't quite get out just yet. If the conference is happening, maybe I'll meet them there. Although I wasn't sure if the conference was still going to be a thing, by the time I was done with all the things I had just listed, it would be the time for the conference to start, and also the time when I would finally reunite with the others. We're here. Before I knew it, as I was in the middle of my thoughts, 10 minutes had passed and the carriage soon stopped in front of a tall and elegant building. Clank. With the doors opening automatically, I slowly stepped out of the carriage and took a deep breath of the fresh air of Henler. We may have been inside of a mountain, but the air here was just as clean as on the outside. The only thing that was different was the smell, as a faint smell reminiscent of that of iron lingered in the air as it traveled through the nostrils of my nose, while I took a deep breath. The smell used to be something that I disliked, but now that I had been in the city for over a month, it was now a smell that I now associated with the city. Taking a step out of the carriage, Douglas looked behind in my direction with a smile on his face. "Let's go. Make sure you set a good impression on them." "I know." Nodding, I followed behind it. 367 rewards. 2. The moment I stepped into the hall, a bright light invaded my eyes, prompting me to cover them with a hand. Taking a few seconds to adjust to the light, lowering my hand, the first thing I saw was an enormous table that stretched all the way to the other side of the hall. Seated along the table were the representatives of each race as well as the dwarven elders. They were all mixed together and there were no particular seating arrangements. It brought for a nice atmosphere as all races mingled together. The moment we entered the hall, all eyes were on us. As Douglas smiled kindly at the others, Waylon, who was next to me, whispered in a soft voice, "Looks like we are the last to come." Yeah. The fact that there were only 3 empty seats did not go unnoticed by us. We realized that our group was the last to come. "Humans, you are finally here." But fortunately, the others didn't seem to mind this, as Gervis stood up and warmly welcomed us to the hall. He pointed at the seats close to him. Come, I've reserved seats just for you." "Thank you." Lowering his head, Douglas did not stand on ceremony and walked toward the seats that Gervis had pointed at. Naturally, I followed behind him. As we were walking toward our seats, from the corner of my eyes, I caught sight of a familiar figure. "Isn't that Malval?" Sitting next to his disciple, Malval was taking a sip of his drink. Seeing me looking at his side, he raised his cup slightly before turning his attention back to his drink. Smiling back at him, we soon arrived at our seats. Right after, standing up, Gervis warmly greeted us. "I'd like to thank you humans for coming." "It is our honor," Douglas politely replied. His reply caused Gervis to laugh out loud as he patted him on the back. Well, he tried, but he ended up patting his thigh. There is no need to be so polite. Your people have made great contributions alongside Jomnuk and..." Pausing, Gervis squinted his eyes before looking towards a not-so-far-away seat, his voice turning into a quiet whisper. "And that guy?" His voice contained hints of anger and bitterness. The guy he was referring to was none other than Rander, who helplessly shook his head. It was clear that he was still not over what had happened a while ago back at Inferno. "Have a seat so that we can start eating." With that said and done, Gervis gestured for us to sit as he himself sat down. Out of respect, we had remained standing until then. Following his example, we all sat down on our seats. Once we did, Gervis looked at everyone present in the hall before coughing slightly and raising his voice. "May I have everyone's attention for a moment?" At his words, silence enveloped the hall. It was clear to see that, judging from how everyone stopped talking when he spoke, Gervis was highly respected by everyone present. "Thank you." The moment silence enveloped the hall, Gervis smiled. Glancing at everyone once more after a brief moment of silence, Gervis started to speak. "If I had to be honest with all of you, at the very beginning of the war, I was not optimistic about our chances." His voice was soft, but each word that came out of his mouth reached the ears of all those present in the hall. "I thought that given our current capabilities, we won't be able to defeat the demons. We also had to worry about both external and internal attacks. Our chances were slim." He paused, letting his words sink in. His eyes were slightly emotional. Gervis looked at every single individual present in the hall. At that moment, it felt like he was reminiscing about the past, thinking about those who were no longer here. Then lowering his head slightly, he thanked everyone. "And when I'm saying I'm truly grateful for your help, I mean it. Had it not been for what you guys did, we would have never been able to win the war. Be it dwarves or whatever other race you are, the moment we fought together, such things no longer mattered, and all I can say is that we, the dwarves of Henneler, are extremely grateful for what you've done for us." As soon as his words faded, I started clapping my hands. Clap, clap. But just as I was in the middle of clapping, lifting my head up, I noticed everyone in the hall staring at me oddly. Clapping is a human thing. It was only after Waylon's reminder that I realized my blunder. An ordinary person could die of embarrassment here, but fortunately my skin was now thick. Extending my hand and grabbing the drink in front of me, I took a soft and subtle sip. Turning my head to face Gervis, I raised my cup and gave a toast to him. It's good stuff. It wasn't. Really wasn't. It was almost as bad as the ale in the tavern, but I was somehow able to keep my face straight as I said those words. Staring at me for a brief moment, Gervis smiled. Turning his attention towards the others, he once again started speaking. That said, I would also like to especially thank a few individuals. Gervis then pointed in our direction. As many of you probably already know, the only reason why we were able to win this war was because of the contributions of certain individuals who are seated among us. Of the individuals, I would like to thank these three humans over here. Douglas, Waylon, and Ren. Turning his head, Gervis's eyes paused on Jomnuk and Rander. Thanks to the intricate plan they formulated with Jomnuk and Rander, they infiltrated the main headquarters of Inferno and created an opportunity for us to end the war. For that, I plan on rewarding each individual present. Gervis's words did not cause any stir as everyone present calmly accepted them. I was of course excited at the prospect of receiving a reward, but I did not show it outwardly. Now, after thinking about it for a long time, I decided to reward Jomnuk and Rander by granting them the highest level of authority, only second to mine, the Metropolis Keeper. Instantly, all the dwarves in the room opened their eyes wide in shock. Before letting the others voice out their opinions, Gervis raised his hand and cut them off. My decision is final. They have made enough contributions to earn their current reward. If you feel that that is unfair, do something of their caliber before talking to me. All the dwarves that had previously tried to voice out their opposition stopped and sat back down. Scanning the crowd with his eyes, Gervis turned to face our direction. He then extended his hand to bring the attention towards us. Regarding you humans, instead of me personally giving you a reward, I'd rather ask you for what you want. Since I don't know what you guys want exactly, I'd prefer to ask you directly. Once he finished his words, Gervis looked at Douglas straight in the eyes. As Gervis was looking straight at him, Douglas glanced towards his right where Waylon sat. Staring at each other for a brief moment, they both nodded in agreement before Douglas opened his mouth to speak. For someone of my age and level, there aren't many rewards that intrigue me. Understandable, Gervis muttered upon hearing his words. As they were both powerful figures, they understood that once someone reached a certain level, not many things attracted their attention. Still, I insist that you ask something from us. It would make us look ungrateful if we don't give you anything for all the help that you have given us. With a slight nod, Douglas worded his next sentence carefully. Then I would like for you to consider the possibility of working together with humanity. The moment his words faded, the hall was enshrouded with silence. Gervis's brows knit in thought. Tapping the table with his finger, his deep voice responded throughout the hall. What do you mean by that? Elaborate a bit further. Unfazed by the sudden shift in mood, Douglas continued. Don't get me wrong, I'm not asking you to ally with the humans immediately. I'm only asking you to consider the possibility. We have the same opponent, so you know that we're on your side. With his brows knit, Gervis propped his elbow on the table and supported his face with his hand. If we do choose to ally with humanity, we would first need to talk with the other alliance members. And not only that, but we would also need to provide you guys with resources so that you can catch up to our current level because frankly, you guys are still quite weak. We know, Douglas calmly replied, but you've seen how much we've grown ever since you guys came without your aid. If you choose to support humanity, I'm sure it will be beneficial to the Fantasia faction in the long term. Silence once again descended on the hall as Gervis stroked his long beard. For the next minute or so, Gervis didn't say a word, and naturally so didn't the other people present in the room. After a while, glancing at Douglas, Gervis carefully said, "Okay. I will give it some consideration. What you've done for us is akin to saving the lives of millions of dwarves. I will only look ungrateful if I refuse." Turning his attention away from Douglas, Gervis looked at the people in the room and announced, "Once the situation settles down for the two other alliance members, I will propose the admission of humanity in our alliance." Once his words faded, a myriad different expressions appeared on the faces of the people present, but no one disagreed. They all knew that Douglas's previous words contained truth in them. Ever since the arrival of the other races, humanity had truly evolved into a medium to large-sized power. Given a few more years, they would without a doubt become even stronger. "Thank you, that's all I'm asking for," Douglas replied, a big smile finally revealed on his aged face. It's the least we can do, Gervis replied with a slight smile. Then he turned his attention towards me. What about you, human? I've heard that you made quite a big contribution. What would you like as a reward? This is it. The moment he asked me that question sitting upright, I carefully worded my next words. Well, my request is much simpler. I'd like to select a skill if possible. After a lot of consideration, I thought that this was the most appropriate reward. I could have asked for an artifact, but with Malval working on my sword, I didn't think it was necessary. Moreover, I still had plenty of artifacts which I had gotten from the Durgars that I had killed back at Inferno. Although most of them were useless as they required demonic energy to function, they could still be worth a lot if sold in the black market. I also thought about trying to get a martial manual, but then I remembered that those could only be found in the human domain. So in the end I was left with no choice but to choose a skill. Not that I was against it, as skills were extremely rare. In fact, they were far more valuable than any manual or artifact. There was another reward that I wanted, but well, now was not the right time to ask. So, you want a skill? Gervis's voice sounded in my ears, disrupting me out of my thoughts. Meeting his eyes with mine, I nodded. Yes. After that, a subtle silence ensued before Gervis nodded back. Okay, that's doable. 368 rewards. 3. Very well, you will be allowed to gain access to our treasure to pick whatever skill you want, Gervis said. Then pausing, he looked at me straight in the eyes and solemnly said. But I warn you, don't be too greedy. When one must choose a skill, one must choose a skill nearing their rank. If you choose a skill that is far above your rank, it would destroy your body, so be careful. I understand, I replied with a subtle nod. What Gervis said wasn't wrong. The only reason why Jean and the others didn't have extremely powerful skills that were far above their rank level with respect to their background was exactly because of this problem. Their immature bodies couldn't contain the power of the skill. Most times they'd end up suffering extreme consequences. As such, one had to be careful when choosing a skill. I'm glad that you know. Smiling in satisfaction, Gervis turned to look at the others in the hall and raised his cup. Now then, since we're over with all of that stuff, it's time for us to celebrate our victory. Cheers. Cheers. Everyone replied back, raising their cups in celebration. And so for the next couple of hours, everyone feasted on the delicious food on the table. I also feasted like never before as I tried all of the food on the table. It had to be noted that the food was made by cooking special beasts. They weren't simple beasts at that, but vicious and powerful wild ones that had to be hunted beforehand. Not only did the meat contain mana, but it also had additional effects in helping the body recover faster. With each bite I took, I could feel myself feeling more and more refreshed. The feeling felt euphoric to me. Since it's free, I might as well. Without holding back, I stuffed myself with as much food as possible, much to the shame of Douglas and Waylon. But I didn't care. Unlike them, I was still in my growing phase. It was only after my stomach could no longer hold any more food that I finally stopped. I think I ate too much, I muttered while leaning back on my seat and rubbing my stomach, which was now bulging slightly. Regret slowly started to seep in. I had eaten so much that I felt like I could explode at any second. Aside from that, I also was slowly starting to feel sleepy. Fortunately, by the time I was done eating, the banquet had already come to an end and everyone slowly went back to their residences. Following Douglas and Waylon out, I also prepared to head out of the hall, but before I could go out, someone tugged my pants. Lowering my head, I spotted Gervis looking up at me from below. He was here to remind me about my previous request. Rin, I've talked to Rander and he will be bringing you to the treasury tomorrow morning. Go get some good rest. The moment he mentioned the words treasury, my mind sobered up real quick and I nodded my head. I understand. I'll be up first thing in the morning. That's good. Have a good rest. Thank you. Lowering my head to thank Gervis, I rushed out to catch up with Douglas and Waylon, who had already exited the hall. Just like that, the reward ceremony had come to an end. The next day, waiting outside of my residence, I let out a long, exhausted yawn. After getting back from the banquet last night, I fell asleep almost immediately. I slept like a log. Honestly, if not for the fact that I was so excited about my reward, I probably wouldn't have gotten out of bed. You're already up? Startling me out of my thoughts was a familiar voice. Turning my head in the direction of where the voice sounded, I spotted Rander in the distance. You're finally here. What do you mean finally? I'm right on time. Rander replied, taking out a small item resembling a pocket watch and checking the time. In fact, I'm a couple of minutes early. Well, to me it's finally, since I've been waiting for this moment since about a month ago. I replied back, walking up to him. A month? That's quite a long time. You were that confident in the plan working? Not really, but it served as good motivation for ensuring that the plan would be a success. That's quite smart. Rander replied, stroking his chin. Then turning around he beckoned me to follow him. Come, our next destination is quite hidden, so we must be extremely careful. Yes. Since we were headed for the treasure, which was the place where all the most precious equipment and items were stored, the place was heavily protected and hidden. His seriousness was understandable. Silently following Rander from behind, we walked through the streets of Henler. Finding the silence uncomfortable, I decided to make small talk on our way to the treasury. Have the barriers been set up again? The ones that I took down? Yeah, Jomnuk set them back up as soon as we beat Inferno. Oh. I see. Was a bit worried about this part just in case the demons once again tried to attack, but it looked like I was worried for nothing. Most likely Jomnuk reactivated the barriers. Since I only disabled the barriers and never actually destroyed them, he was able to set them back up in no time. That's good. After that, I continued to make small talk with Rander on our way to our destination. Before long we stopped in front of a large portal. Hey. Casually greeting a dwarven guard that was standing guard of the portal, Rander headed for the portal and started to configure its coordinates. Staring at him from behind, I thought. I see, so in order to keep the location of the treasury a secret, the dwarves must have only told the coordinates of the place to a select few individuals. Reminded me of what Inferno did. Alright, I'm done. It was only after a couple of minutes after Rander went to the portal that, clapping his hands together, he turned towards me and indicated to me to get in the portal. I've already set the coordinates, you go in first. We can't let others know of the location of the place. Okay. Taking a step forward and greeting the guard, I climbed up a couple of stairs and soon stepped into the portal. See you on the other side. Those were the last words I heard before my vision blurred and slowly I was enshrouded by a familiar uncomfortable sensation. Ugh, I hate portals. I muttered as I took a step out of the portal. Despite having been through quite a lot of them, I still hated the sensation I got from taking them. It felt as though I had been spun around in circles at extreme speeds. Nauseating to say the least. What's this smell? While I was recovering, a rustic scent lingered in the air, invading my nostrils. Lifting my head up, my eyes soon paused on an enormous ancient door that stood opposite of me. At the moment there was no one standing outside of the door, but I knew for a fact that there were people guarding it. They were most likely hiding somewhere. It's nice, isn't it? Coming out of the portal, Rander looked at the enormous door in the distance. A sense of pride could be felt in his words as his eyes paused on me. Yeah. I softly replied back. The more I stared at the door, the more noticed the complexities around it. It felt more and more majestic to me. Follow me. Walking towards the door, Rander took out a small badge from his dimensional space and placed it inside of a small socket in the middle of the door. I click. With a small clicking sound, once the badge entered the socket, a soft rumble sounded and the ground trembled. Rumble. Take a step back. Pushing me back a bit, Rander watched as the enormous doors opened up before us. Since it's a secret, I can't tell you much about the place, Rander said as he interlocked his hands behind his back. All you need to know is that even if multiple SS ranks tried to break through the door, it would take them at least a day to break through the place. And that's if they were all attacking with their strongest attack. Bang. With a small bang, the sides of the door smashed against the walls, enabling me to see what was on the other side of the door. Oh. No words could describe what I felt when I caught a glimpse of what stood behind the door. I was speechless. With countless treasures ranging from all sorts of artifacts to cores and skill books, neatly displayed throughout the enormous room, my eyes couldn't help but start to glimmer. My heart slowly sped up. Halting his steps by the side of the door, Rander looked at me and said, "I'll wait for you over here." Raising his hand and pointing towards the room, he continued, "You're free to pick anything you want from the room. You said you wanted a skill book, right?" "Yes." "Then you can find those over there at the very end of the room," he said as he pointed towards the very end of the room on the right side. "Thank you." Unable to hold my excitement, I nodded my head at every one of his words. Seeing how excited I was, Rander sighed and shook his head. He was all too familiar with this scene. Go choose your skill, but remember you're only allowed to choose one. Don't take any more than you're supposed to. The last part of his sentence was said with an incredibly serious tone, as Rander warned me about the consequences of being too greedy. Don't worry, I'm not that stupid. I honestly replied back, curbing down on my excitement a bit. Although everything was tempting, I wasn't someone who was blinded by greed. Thanking Rander one more time, I quickly headed in the direction he previously pointed at, the direction where the skill books were located. The room was fairly large, about the size of the Locks Arena ground. As I headed towards the skill book section, there were many things that attracted my attention, but I had a clear goal from the very beginning. Even though everything in the room was tempting, I didn't let them tempt me away from what I really needed. Where is the beat skill section? I should also check the gauge rank section while I'm at it. Before long I arrived at the place Rander pointed at, and the first thing I did was look for all the B ranked skills available. I also kept a lookout for the A ranked section. Although I wouldn't be able to use it immediately, by the time I broke through B rank, I should have no trouble learning an A ranked skill. If I had to estimate, I'd estimate that within half a year or less I would have no problem breaking through to B- rank. I was C+ ranked at the moment, but that was thanks to the contract. Once that expired, I'd regress back to my old strength. Well, that was unless I improved during that time, which in that case I would not regress and remain the same. As I was in deep thought, pondering over which level of skill I should get, the corner of my eyes caught the side of a small section. A small section where only a couple of books rested, but the energy coming out from each book was palpitating, borderline terrifying. What if? Catching sight of the area, a dangerous thought flashed through my mind. No, let's not be delusional. Shaking my head, I tried to get rid of all useless thoughts from my head. That section over there was the S-ranked section, and for a brief moment I was almost tempted into going there. But after rationally thinking about things, I instantly dropped the idea. By the time I would end up breaking to S rank, at least 5 years would have passed, and in the meantime, I could have used the skill that I had gotten from here to further improve my strength. Plus, I actually already knew of an S-ranked skill that I wanted, was just too weak for it to get it. Let's see what they have. In the end, for the next hour, I looked through the B rank and A rank sections, till finally, after a long time, I narrowed my search to 2 skills. Eyes of Chronos. Upon using this skill, the user will be able to see everything in slow motion. The more mana is used, the slower the time will be in their eyes. Be quick burst. Upon using this skill, the user will be able to display a quick burst of speed that is 10x the user's regular speed. Effective skill will only last for a single burst, with a cooldown of 5 minutes per user. Staring at the description of the 2 skills before me, stroking my chin, I muttered. Which one should I choose? 369 rewards. 4. Waiting by the door of the treasury, Rander turned his head toward me, sensing my gaze. Have you selected your skill? He asked, squinting. Yeah. Which one is it? I choose this skill. I handed Rander the skill book that I had chosen. Lowering his head and staring at the book, a surprised look flashed on Rander's face. Eye of Chronos? Yes. After thinking things through, I decided that this was the most optimal skill for me at the moment. Quick burst was nice since I could activate it immediately, unlike the third movement of the Keiki style, but the 5-minute cooldown at the end was what made me turn away from it. In the end, after thinking things properly, the Eye of Chronos was the only option for me. If I'm not wrong, you're still C+ rank. That means you won't be able to learn this skill until you break through to B rank. Are you sure about your decision? Rander questioned, looking at the description of the skill book in his hands. Raising my head and meeting Rander's eyes, I nodded. Yes, I'll go with this. Although I couldn't learn the skill immediately, I was not in need of any skills at the present moment. Since I was going to stay in Henneler until things outside calmed down and also wait for Malval to finish forging my sword, I was not pressed for time. Well, okay, as long as you're fine with that decision. Gervis did say that you could pick whatever you want. Now that you've chosen, let's go back. Rander said, shrugging his shoulders. Taking a step out of the treasury, he looked at me right in the eyes and asked once again. Once we leave, you won't be able to change your mind, so I'll repeat it one more time. Are you sure about your decision? Do you really want to pick that skill? I'm sure, I replied without an ounce of hesitation. This was the ideal skill that I needed, and I wasn't going to let it slip away just because of some short-term gains. Gazing in my direction for a brief moment, Rander lowered his head and placed his palm by the side of the door. All right. Motioning me to get out, he tapped the emblem that he had previously attached to the wall. I've already recorded your choice. I'll now be closing the treasury. As soon as his words faded, Rander retrieved the emblem stuck on the wall, and the ground once again started to shake with a low rumble. Moving out of the portal with his hands behind his back, Rander stared at the treasury doors slowly closing away. I wish I could have taken more. I thought to myself as I stared at the treasury from behind Rander. It was just a wish, but I also knew that it was impossible. Well, that was unless I made any more contributions. I should just be happy with what I have. The skill was obviously not the only reward I had gotten from the whole ordeal, but it was the most precious of them all. Now that I had taken the skill I wanted, it was time for me to go back up and start planning about my future. Shall we go? Startling me out of my thoughts was Rander's voice. Lifting my head up, I gently pressed onto the ground with my foot and followed him from behind. Like that, I had finally gotten myself a new skill. You chose an 8-ranked skill? Small Snake's surprised voice sounded in my room. Yeah, I think it was the best choice, I replied back, staring at the book on the table opposite me. Although it might take a while for me to reach B rank, given our current circumstances, I doubt we would be able to get out of here anytime soon. Pressing my palm on the table and standing up, I looked at everyone seated close to me. They were Angelica, Leopold, Ava, Hein, Small Snake, and Ryan. All the members of my mercenary group. Looks like this war has truly helped them grow. I thought as my eyes paused on everyone. Compared to when they first entered the city a couple of months back, everyone had matured quite a bit as their auras possessed faint traces of bloodlust, something only an experienced fighter would have. If they fought their previous selves, they would without a doubt be able to beat them without shedding a single drop of sweat. I felt a little proud as I stared at them. Of course, that didn't last for long as I remembered what I called them here for. Raising my fist over my mouth, I coughed lightly. Anyways, as I was saying, since we're most likely not going to be leaving this place anytime soon, I've decided that we should spend all of our time training. Training? What are you saying? As everyone processed my words, all I was met with was confused looks. Knowing full well that they were going to react that way, I pressed my palm down and continued. Yes, training. After talking with Douglas and Waylon, they agreed to train you. Pausing, I turned to look in Ryan and Small Snake's direction. Well, almost all of you. In the case of Small Snake and Ryan, you guys will be trained by Jomnuk. Jomnuk? You don't mean? Yup, the best engineer of this city. He owed me one, so I asked him to train you too. Crossing my arms together, my brows knit. He did say yes, but he also said that if you guys are not on par with what he's teaching, he'll stop. Once my words faded, Small Snake and Ryan stared at each other for a brief moment before they looked back at me. The one to speak was obviously Small Snake, who frowned. I'm grateful for the offer, but what about the chip in your head? Are you not going to get that removed? The chip. Raising my brow, I suddenly recalled that I did indeed have the chip still stuck inside of my head. Now that I think about it, Douglas did say that they've caught the people from the monolith and have locked them up in prison. I should definitely visit the place when I have time. There were still a couple of things that I needed to get done. Scratching my chin, I sat back down and leaned on my chair. Then, after a brief moment of silence, I looked at Ryan, who was seated opposite of me. About the chip, I want you to get it removed for me. What? Pressing both of his hands on the table, Small Snake stood up. So you're not going to get your chip removed now? And you're trying to get Ryan to do it? A 14-year-old kid. Yeah, pretty much. I nonchalantly replied back. The reason why I wanted to remove the chip in the first place was because of the threat of the monolith. But now that I was in a safe place where the monolith wouldn't dare to step in after what had just happened, the removal of the chip was no longer one of my main priorities. Might as well just have Ryan do it. It could serve as great motivation for him. Casually glancing in Ryan's direction, I asked, You can do it in a year's time, right? You previously told me that you could have done it in about this much time. Now that you'll have Jomnuk teaching you, you should be able to finish at a much faster time, no? Propping my elbow on the table and supporting the side of my cheek with my hand, I lazily said, Just treat the chip removal as a graduation test. This. A complicated look flashed on Small Snake's face as he looked at Ryan. From the concern that I could see in his eyes as he looked at Ryan, I could tell that Small Snake had gotten quite attached to him in the past month. Made me quite happy. But contrary to Small Snake's concern, with a resolute look on his face, Ryan stared back at me, his eyes unwavering. Let me do it. His previous childish demeanor was completely gone, replaced by a mature-like seriousness that I had never seen from him before. His sudden change in demeanor caught everyone off guard as they all looked at Ryan with surprised looks. Especially Small Snake, who couldn't find the right words to say. Not minding the stares he was receiving from the others, Ryan spoke up. I can do it. Since you've put so much trust in me, I will try my best to help you remove the chip in your head. Staring at him for no longer than a couple of seconds, the edges of my lips pulled upwards. If that's what you wish, then it's settled. I then glanced upwards towards the standing Small Snake. Do you have any problems with what Ryan said? With a complicated look on his face, Small Snake looked at Ryan, who stared back at him, his eyes filled with burning desire. Echi. Small Snake then let out a long sigh. What am I gonna do with you guys? He complained before nodding his head softly. Fine, I'll join as well. I want to see how well he is going to progress. That's great. A large smile appeared on my face. Then turning my attention towards Ava, I asked, how about you? How is the situation with the flute? Malval is handling it. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest, Ava replied back with clear eyes devoid of any of its previous shyness. The war seemed to have changed her. I see, I'll have to talk to him later then. Since he was also taking care of my sword, I could use the time when I was checking on it to see how he was progressing with Ava's flute. The only problem I saw with the flute was that it was an S-ranked item or even higher. So, when it does get fixed, Ava would no longer be able to use it. I had to find a way to solve that problem. About you two. I then turned to face Leopold and Hein. Since you guys contributed quite a lot too, you should be able to get yourself some good swords and guns. You should probably do that when you have time. Will do. Both of them replied at the same time. That's good. I wasn't the only one that got rewarded. The others did too. But compared to me, their rewards were a lot smaller. Even then, getting a good artifact should not be a problem for them. Lastly, Angelica. Turning in Angelica's direction, who was quietly sitting on a chair without speaking, an odd look flashed across my face. Well, she's already sorted her stuff, so there isn't much I can say about her. Unlike us, she didn't need to train as much. Though not many knew, she had also gotten rewarded quite well. Since the dwarves had looted the Inferno headquarters, there were a few devil fruits around. Because they had no use for it, they just decided to reward Angelica with them. Therefore, she was all set for the future already. Well, I guess that's it for now. Standing up, I looked at the others. Let's not waste any more time with this meeting and start training. It's rare for us to have a moment like this, so let's make full use of what we have. Finished with what I wanted to say, I dismissed everyone from the meeting. Watching everybody leave my room, taking a deep breath, a resolute look flashed across my eyes as I swore to myself. I'm going to make full use of this time that I have to become as strong as possible. With threats appearing one after another, I had to make full use of this moment to become as strong as possible. Since I now had the opportunity to do so, I was planning on using it as best as I could. 370 Synchronization. 3. Pitch black darkness enveloped the world. I've always been meaning to ask, but if the Demon King manages to take over Earth, what are you planning on doing? A voice suddenly resounded throughout the nothingness. What? Are you thinking that I'll just go run to some other planet? Another voice replied back. Will you not? If only things were as simple as that. The voice cracked a little. Unprecedented bitterness and sadness hid beneath the voice as the veil hiding the obscured figure trembled slightly. It's not possible, he muttered, obviously finding it hard to continue speaking about the topic. What do you mean it's not possible? If we truly can't defeat the Demon King, don't you think we should just ditch this place? The other voice asked, with a mix of confusion and curiosity hidden beneath his words. Just get the people you are close with and teleport somewhere far away. Away from the Demon King's reach. I know you have the mean. But before the voice could finish speaking, the loud sound of something smacking sounded. The sound was reminiscent of a hand smacking against a flat surface. Following the smacking sound, the other obscured raised his voice. I've tried all right. Everything that you can think of, I've tried. I have fucking tried it all. None of it works. It's impossible. His voice boomed throughout the voice as every one of his words was mixed with helplessness and desperation. One could also feel the little bit of madness hidden deep within it. Curb that thought of your mind. There is no escaping the Demon King. Unless we defeat him, we're all fucked. His last words powerfully rang throughout the void. It's impossible. The voice muttered with heavy breaths. Following this, a brief moment of silence ensued as neither of the two figures spoke. Then the veil that was obscuring the two figures slowly started to fade, revealing two individuals on the opposite end of a wooden table. One was standing while the other sat down. The one standing was wearing elegant black clothes while the one sitting was wearing a casual white t-shirt. Even though the veil faded, the faces of the two figures were still obscured, making it impossible to discern the identity of the two individuals speaking. Leaning back a bit, crossing his arms, the white shirt individual broke the silence. What do you mean tried? The Demon King has not even ascended yet. You make it sound as though you have tried this before. The black clothes male's body froze for a second before he quickly waved his hand. You're thinking too much. He then sat down and stared at the other individual opposite of him. Taking a moment to choose his words carefully, the black-clothed figure finally managed to calm down a bit. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, he started to explain the reason for his previous outburst. The reason why I'm saying that it's impossible to defeat the Demon King once he conquered Earth is because by then he will break through the world limits and finally gain to access the Akashic records. Placing the palm of his hands on the table, the white-shirt figure was taken aback. The Akashic records? What in the world are you talking about? Raising his hand and touching his forehead, the black-clothed male thought for a moment. Then instead of answering the question he asked one. Have you ever wondered why we are able to see status windows? How we are able to gain access to skills, or where mana comes from? The black-clothed individual interlocked his hands together. Has that thought ever crossed your mind once? How many of those things are possible? Or did you think that everything has come just because of some supreme power out there that has given everyone access to skills and mana? The black-clothed male's words powerfully rang inside of the white-clothed ears as he deeply mused over his words before replying back. I have had thoughts, but because I've always been paying attention to the Demon King, I've never had properly thought about it. Pausing, the white-shirt male looked at the black-clothed one. Are you trying to say that all of the phenomenons that you have listed are because of these so-called Akashic records? Yes. Nodding his head, the black-clothes male exhaled loudly. The reason why we are able to see status windows and gain skills is all because of the Akashic records. Are these records some sort of god? The white-shirt male asked. It was obvious that he was having trouble understanding what the black-clothed individual was trying to say to him, but he continued to ask. Since, as you've said, they are responsible for the status windows and the creation of skills, they must be some sort of gods, right? Lowering his head, the black-clothed male didn't say anything. Placing his hand in his chin, he mused for a bit. Then lifting it up, he looked back at the individual sitting opposite of him. In a sense you can say that, but at the same time they are not. What do you mean? It's complicated. The Akashic records are a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, mana, skills, emotions, and intents that have ever occurred in the past, present, or future in terms of all entities and life forms. That includes all other races. They are essentially the record of the laws of the world, but... The black-clothed individual paused. But what? The white-shirt male asked, curious about the black-clothed male's next words. Lowering his hand, the black-clothed male's tone became solemn. Leaning forward, his voice became fainter. But the Demon King is trying to gain access to them. Or to be more precise, he wants to take control of the Akashic records. What? The moment the black-clothed male said those words, the white-shirt male stood up in shock. Is that even possible? Are these records a physical entity? His voice was filled with incredulity as he slowly started to understand the reasoning behind the black-clothed individual's previous outburst. They are and aren't at the same time, but once you reach a certain level, gaining access to them is not impossible, and that's what the Demon King is trying to do. And in order to do that, he must conquer the earth and consume all of the mana in the world so that he can break through to the next rank. Supporting his body with the aid of the table, the white-clothed individual asked. In short, we have no choice but to beat the Demon King? Yes. The black-clothed individual replied. Leaning back, he stared upwards and helplessly said. The Demon King is incredibly powerful. I'm not very confident in my chances against him. But the white-clothed individual didn't think like that as he said. You haven't even faced him. What makes you think you can't face him? You're the strongest in humanity, the first to break through too. What makes you think that you can defeat him? Have a little bit of faith in yourself. If only things were like that. The black-clothed male muttered. Suddenly, sensing something, the black-clothed male's body jerked towards the right, and a powerful aura swept out of his body. He found me. He muttered in an incomparably solemn tone. Who found you? The white-clothed male asked, similarly staring in the direction where the black-clothed individual was staring, but he saw nothing. Staring back at him, he asked, what exactly are you looking at and who found you? The Time Remnant. The black-clothed male replied, fixing the collar of his jacket. The time what? Before he got an answer, the black-clothed male disappeared from where he was standing. Sorry, I have to go. Hey, why? I have no time now. I don't want it to find you. It's not something you can deal with. What are you? Before the white-shirt male could finish speaking, the world slowly started to crumble as the darkness started to envelop completely. Before long, everything disappeared and what remained was a chilling darkness. Whop. Sitting up straight, Kevin took a deep breath. Huff, huff. His breathing was heavy and the bedsheets below him were soaked in sweat. It took a while for him to fully calm down, and when he did, looking around the room and seeing that he was in an unfamiliar place, he forcefully calmed himself down as he wondered. Where am I? The room looked to be a regular hospital room. Next to him, all sorts of equipment appeared as they repeatedly beeped. Ugh. Letting out a groan, Kevin held onto his head as an agonizing pain coursed through his head. Just what was that dream? It was faint, but he could still vividly remember what he had just seen. The Akashic Records? The Demon King is trying to take over them and the only way he can do it is through the conquest of the earth. The more Kevin thought about it, the more agonizing the pain in his head became. It was as though it was trying to reject all the information he had just seen. He couldn't understand anything. Could this vision have just been a fabrication of my imagination? He thought as he tried to explain the contents of his vision. Ding. But before this idea could even gain any traction, a familiar chime rang in his head and his system interface showed up in front of him. == Quest reward. Synchronization plus 5%. Completed. Additional rewards. Plus 5,000 credits. Plus advanced potion X5. == So it wasn't a dream. The moment he saw the quest window, he knew that whatever he had witnessed moments ago was real. As he understood this, the questions in his head only multiplied. Who were the two that were talking in the vision? And what was the time remnant the black-clothed individual was talking about? So many questions, yet no answer. As he was trying to make heads or tails about what had happened, Kevin suddenly recalled something and his body jerked up. Wait, is Ren okay? The reason why he was in such a state was because he was trying to save Ren. By using the red book, he forcefully broke through to rank and changed the events depicted his death in the book. But where was the book? Frantically looking around the room, Kevin looked for the red book, but he saw nothing. Shit, the book must still be in my room. It was clear that his mind was still groggy and messed up due to the sudden vision. If not for that, he wouldn't have forgotten the fact that the book was not something he could store in his dimension space, let alone the system. Wait, what if? A sudden idea flashed his mind as he raised his head and stared at the system interface in front of him. His eyes soon paused on a certain text. Quest completed. The quest said to save Ren. If it says that it is complete, it can only mean that I've succeeded, right? Once his thoughts paused there, Kevin's shoulders relaxed a little as he leaned back. Tapping onto the system and double-checking to make sure it was like that, Kevin breathed a sigh of relief. Slumping back on his bed, he softly muttered. I'm glad that he's all right. As long as Ren was still alive, the little struggle he suffered was worth it. Clenching his fists tightly, he realized that his body felt a lot more powerful than before. His vision was also clearer. Not only that, but his other senses also experienced a similar thing as they all became sharper. I guess this can serve as consolation for what had happened, Kevin thought as he bitterly smiled. Lately, the pace at which he had been breaking through had slowed down quite a bit. For some odd reason, the system had been assigning him a lot less missions than before. It had stagnated his previous stellar growth, but given his talent, The speed at which he was improving was incredibly fast too. It had to be noted that he had been spending most of the time trying to perfect the Levi Shaw style instead of focusing on his rank. If he had been focusing on improving his rank, he might have been able to be a lot higher ranked. Bang. Huh. Out of nowhere, startling Kevin out of his thoughts was the loud sound of the hospital room smacking open. Kevin. Entering the room was none other than Emma. Her complexion seemed haggard and her face was quite pale. The moment her eyes landed on Kevin, her mouth trembled slightly. Raising her hand to wipe her eyes, and said something in an almost inaudible voice. "I'm glad that you're still okay." Had it been the previous Kevin, he might have been unable to hear it, but now that his ears were a lot more sensitive, he was able to hear every word that Emma muttered. His heart warmed. But that didn't last for long, as Emma's face soon became indifferent. The moment Kevin saw that, his heart froze. Without saying anything, Emma slowly walked in his direction. Watching Emma slowly making her way towards him, her indifferent face made Kevin swallow a mouthful of saliva. He felt an ominous premonition. Raising his hand in her direction, he waved slightly. "Hey."